Deep in the New Mexico desert, there's a treasure shrouded by so much secrecy, one that was so highly sought after that the man who found it was murdered for it. Our story begins in the unforgiving deserts of White Sands, New Mexico, in November of 1937. It's the pure epitome of a barren wasteland. Somewhere you can picture any classic Western taking place. It's a beautiful sea of nothingness, with little in the name of life, but inspires adventure, if nothing else. Enter a man named Doc Noss, a traveling medicine showman, which is likely the first image that comes to your head when hearing such a title. Someone who puts on a free show from town to town in hopes of selling cure-all elixirs and snake oils. A pretty common practice in the Wild West era and the early 19th century. After which, he settled down in Hot Springs with his wife, Ova Beckwith, which he nicknamed Babe, and opened a foot clinic together. Doc was spending his time deer hunting in White Sands one day, and, after a period of time, he'd grown weary and exhausted, desperate for water. He found himself hiking to the top of a hill known as Victorio Peak, where he intended to find spring water, but instead, what he'd find would change his life forever, and begin perhaps one of the most bizarre mysteries of the Southwest. As if ripped from the pages of fiction, Doc Noss wouldn't find water, but instead a strange hole in the ground with a ladder leading down into the earth, one that led to a labyrinth of tunnels inside. Doc climbed down the ladder and took it upon himself to explore what was inside. And growing ever curious, he decided to advance through these tunnels until he was eventually met with a massive cavern. He spent time searching the various chambers of the cavern until he found one that was home to a chest. A particularly old chest that supposedly inscribed on its lid were the words, sealed silver, written in Old English. Now, Doc claims to have found much more besides this old chest during his cave exploits. But what he claims to have found hidden inside were the types of riches spoken about only in legend, an overwhelming amount of silver, jewels, and most importantly, gold bars, all of which he estimated to be worth what would be $1.7 billion in today's money. All of this found completely accidentally on a regular hunting trip.
First time Doc went down there and actually found that it was more than just a cave, and he found the treasure.
He found out it was a treasure storehouse.
What did he say when he came out of the mine?
Well, he couldn't believe it. He didn't know that rick of bars there was gold. They were tarnished. Those people back there had no way to take their ore to the mine or smelter, so they melted up a conglomeration: gold, silver, copper, and lead, and there was some platinum in there too. So he had told me that there must have been a big market for pig iron in the early days. I said, why did you say that? And he said, well, I never seen so much. And so then he said that they'd been ricked up, but there's dirt from the wall that come clear down slope, dust had in years, clear to the edge. And he said, I took my hand and ricked that off in a little spot. And he said that just like laying, just like your fingers, you'd lay wood, one log after another. And he didn't bother, for he thought that was least of his troubles. And he was bringing out the money and things that he could get in there, and jewels, and bringing them out, and we all seen them.
He returned home to his wife, Babe, likely ecstatic as ever over the one-of-a-kind discovery. In fact, Doc had told her that down in the cavern sat a whopping 16,000 bars of gold, just waiting to be taken. Strange circumstances aside, Doc, nor his wife, were going to let this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity slip by. And with the convenience of being the only ones to know this secret, Victorio Peak was about to see a lot more of the both of them. Now, as for the potential origins of this treasure, we'll get to later. But for Doc Noss and Babe, they couldn't care less. Maybe this meant something to someone a long time ago, but whoever it was, they never came to claim it, and that was all right with them. Doc and Babe would spend countless times coming and going to Victorio Peak like clockwork, constantly scraping every nook and cranny they could find in the various tunnels and caverns. And as if this cave of riches wasn't already abundant with enough mystery, one of the many caverns was discovered to have 79 human skeletons packed together in an enclosure. Keeping consistent with their tireless search, the couple would bring home over 200 gold bars back over the course of 2 years. Between that time and the spring of 1938, Noss and Babe headed to Santa Fe to file a treasure trove claim by filing a lease with the state of New Mexico to legally own the area around Victorio Peak, effectively granting them ownership of the secret treasure trove. There was more work to be had, however, as Doc had more plans to access the greater treasure that awaited him deeper into the peak. He was planning to open more than one passageway than the one he'd been exploring so far. In the meantime, he diligently hid much of the gold bars he already discovered, keeping the secret extremely close, not even with family, and strategically hiding each bar in separate locations. Doc's grandson, Terry Delanis, said that his grandfather hid them on the sides of country roads, ranches, and even horse tanks. Some even just buried in the sand, marking them with unique, different-colored rocks. It's only common sense not to hoard all your findings in one place, but Doc Noss wasn't just doing this to prevent theft. He was doing it because it was illegal. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 was implemented to stop the hoarding of gold and help restore confidence back in the US dollar as part of President Roosevelt's New Deal. Although citizens couldn't use gold as a form of currency anymore, there were a few exceptions to the rule, like continuing the trade of gold jewelry. For Doc, this meant that the only way to truly bank on his find was to sell it on the black market. However, tedious the sale of this gold would be, Doc continued mining Victorio Peak, and in the fall of 1939, he had a plan to open a larger passageway into the peak by eliciting the help of a mining engineer named Montgomery. Now, with more professional help, the plan was to dynamite an opening into a lower shaft that would hopefully provide easier access to the treasure. But unfortunately for them, they bit off more than they could chew. After dynamiting a large boulder that led further down, the explosion caused a devastating cave-in that completely collapsed the shaft, ultimately blocking themselves out of the mine. By the looks of it, there was no getting back in. Not anytime soon, at least. And now, there was still the matter of what to do with the gold bars he'd already recovered. Throughout the late 30s and through the 40s, Doc Noss spent much of his time carefully calculating just how he would distribute and sell these bars to prospective buyers on the black market. If it wasn't apparent by now, Doc Noss was extremely paranoid with his find, and he wasn't going to sell unless the buyer was as serious about it as he was. Over a course of nearly a decade, Doc Noss was selling off mere nuggets sporadically, as not to pick up any legal heat. It must have been a frustrating endeavor, as Doc and Babe were the furthest thing from rich, yet they were sitting on a literal gold mine in the middle of the Great Depression, no less. Even then, with the fullness of the treasure now out of reach, Noss still had hundreds of bars to go around. He just needed to find the right client. And eventually, he would. But sometimes, things are too good to be true. In 1948, Doc Noss made contact with a Texas man employed with the oil industry named Charlie Ryan. The two men met in hopes of making an exchange with the gold, the biggest Doc had ever made, and between 1948 and 1949, they solidified it. To act as a win-win, Doc intended to use the money to go towards reopening the collapsed shaft. How much was Charlie willing to invest? $25,000 for 51 bars of gold, a little more than $300,000 today. But the thing is, even though the deal was struck, Doc Noss very quickly began distrusting Charlie. Whether he had ample reason to suspect betrayal or succumb to his own paranoia, he regretted making the agreement in the first place. He doubled down on the thought that this treasure might be in danger. So, he enlisted the help of rodeo rider Tony Jolly to dig up and rebury 110 of the bars in a completely new location. Not even his own wife would be in the know. Charlie Ryan didn't take kindly to Doc backing out of the deal and accused him of hiding the score from him. And at Doc's house, on the evening of March 5th, 1949, both men would find themselves in the throes of a heated argument over it. What exactly was said is mostly a mystery, but it's generally believed that Charlie threatened Doc's life if he didn't reveal the new location, saying that he wouldn't leave the room alive. Then, Doc turned and ran out of the house in hopes to retrieve a gun he had in his truck, but before he could do that, Charlie chased close behind and fired 2 shots into Noss from behind. He lay slumped over the fender of his pickup, dead from his wounds. Doc Noss and the secret of his recovered treasure were officially lost. As for Charlie Ryan, he pleaded for his innocence, claiming that his actions were purely out of self-defense, saying that it was Doc who had threatened his life by shooting him, prompting Ryan to take action. In the end, Charlie was acquitted of the murder, but rumors have persisted that the trial ended in his favor due to bribes. Bribes paid to the judge in gold bars. As for the rodeo rider, Tony Jolly, who helped Doc rebury the gold, he claimed to have recovered 10 bars after the affair, but chose to stay silent about where the rest were hidden.
Okay, describe that. I need a little more than that, Tony. I need you to tell me altogether that night I handled and saw 100, something like that.
I handled and I saw 110 bars of gold.
And you're sure it was gold?
I later got 10 of them back and disposed of them and got quite a lot of money out of it. I don't care if it's gold or not. I know it was gold because I assayed it and I know what it assayed, and I disposed of 10 bars of gold.
Now with the elusive legend of the Victorio Peak treasure more publicized, treasure hunters descended on the region for years to come in hopes of discovering what Doc took to his grave. In fact, it's believed that Noss potentially left behind over 15,000 gold bars deep within the peak, whose central passageway was now caved in. Even after losing her husband, Ova Babe Noss's sense of adventure never left. For the next 3 years, Babe and her children regularly made trips to Victorio Peak, tirelessly laboring to clear the collapsed passageway that Doc spent so much time trying to find alternative routes to. As backbreaking as that work must have been, surprisingly, the Noss family worked so hard that apparently they were only a mere 12 yards away from the treasure. Thing is, there was one more obstacle in the way of continuing the dig, one much tougher than stacks of bedrock: the U.S. government. Come 1954, in a devastating blow to their progress, the state of New Mexico forced the Noss family off their property by order of the United States Army. In order to expand the White Sands missile range, the Army needed Victorio Peak and the land surrounding it. It was no debate, really. In an instant, they simply didn't own the land anymore, exclusive for military base personnel only. But all because Babe and the kids weren't able to look for the gold didn't mean the search was off. Because in 1958, yet another attempt to nab the score was made, this time by a few members of the military themselves. While at Victorio Peak, Airman First Class Thomas Bartlett and 4 off-duty soldiers from Holman Air Force Base took it upon themselves to clear the rest of the collapsed part of the cavern themselves. And when they did, their discovery proved the Noss family's efforts valid, but very much worth the effort. According to Bartlett, they managed to uncover the golden bounty after they scratched the metal. Although Doc or Babe didn't get to clear the tunnel, what they were working for did indeed exist. The find was tempting. In fact, the 5 men engraved their initials on a bar and placed it on the outer part of the pile just for safekeeping. When the airmen left the peak, they informed their superiors about the discovery in hopes of digging even deeper for the rest, but they were denied access to any further exploration. But now with the treasure open and exposed with word now out, Thomas Bartlett wasn't going to let anyone pocket the treasure off their hard work that easily. Apparently, in an act of pure defiance, Bartlett and his fellow airmen returned to Victorio Peak that following weekend with one mission in mind: making sure the secret was buried deeper than it already was. With the help of some dynamite, the soldiers placed the explosives at 4 different parts of the cave entrance and detonated it, effectively creating another obstacle to the mysterious riches. What happens next is a bit shadowy, and it only proves that despite the gold being harder to reach, doesn't mean that it was forever lost. In 1961, Victorio Peak was subject to a top-secret military operation that was allegedly authorized by Secretary of the Army Elvis J. Starr Jr., an operation that not only involved the military, but also the Secret Service, and apparently the Bureau of the Mint. Although a heavily redacted Secret Service report does confirm that an operation was carried out there, it claims that no such gold was found, but witnesses point to a very different story. Reportedly, over an effort of 5 days, the government attempted to gain access into the tunnel network that led to the fabled stash, but found that the boulders blocking the passage were too much. But these witnesses relay that vehicles such as Army helicopters and trucks were present at the site, indicating that they had indeed found something. Even more puzzling is that the redacted report clearly stated that the military hadn't consulted with the New Mexico State Land Office about the operation, which would have put into question just how legal this whole thing was. The big rumor at the end of the day was that the Army did in fact extract the gold with their combined efforts and secretly seized it. A Captain Orby Swanner, also stationed at White Sands, supposedly even told his brother-in-law that he assisted in the effort in 1961, claiming that he helped transport gold worth more than $300 million from the site. In 1963, the Army petitioned the state of New Mexico for mineral rights at Victorio Peak, but the state upheld the Noss family claim that was made back in the 1930s. It seemed like a small victory for Babe Noss and the children, but aerial shots of the peak surfaced, revealing that there really had been work done at the site. Persistent as ever, Babe continued to fight for the family claim, and in 1961, after hearing about what the Army was potentially doing, she filed an injunction in hopes of stopping the activity at Victorio Peak. In 1963, the state upheld her request, granting her a 60-day permit to continue her search for the treasure. For the first time in a long time, the Noss family were allowed to return to where it all began. This time, she and the family came prepared, enlisting the help of a mining company with access to excavation tools and capable machinery to make a pathway into the mountain. Other professionals came to help as well, like geologists and other experienced treasure hunters. Among them was scientist Lambert Dolphin from the Stanford Research Institute, who apparently used the power of sonar to detect more caverns deep inside. While there, Dolphin stated that the sonar screen picked up echoes deep within the peak, about 300 to 400 feet down, around the area that Doc Noss had stumbled upon all those years ago. The dig was highly publicized and under strict Army supervision, and if there was any debate that the military had stepped foot in the caverns, well, there were signs of previous excavations, and an Army signature was found scribbled on a cave wall. Even with heavy machinery and more capable hands, the search proved fruitless, and at the end of the day, the excavation had reached its limit. It was a valiant effort. The mountain finally got the large-scale attention it deserved, but it's safe to assume that far too much damage had been done over the years. If anything, this event continued to propel the ongoing mystery to even greater heights, drawing more eyes to the treasure of Victorio Peak and sparking further interest. Babe Noss, with her determination unending, continued to advocate for access to the mountain all the way up to her death in 1979. Based on what we know now, many questions remain. Did the U.S. Army actually manage to confiscate the gold? And if so, was it all of it? What could have been the story behind the nearly 80 skeletons found down in the caverns? But one of the most burning questions about the whole ordeal is the treasure itself. Who stowed it there? And for how long? There are actually quite a few theories surrounding where exactly the treasure came from. One of them being the work of 16th century Spanish conquistadors, who were already known for hiding portions of their treasure looted from the Aztecs or Incas. This way, the likelihood of theft or piracy was significantly decreased. Don Juan de Oñate, the man who founded New Mexico as a Spanish colony, is also a popular person of interest connected to the stash, who supposedly had massive amounts of gold and jewels. Then comes the theory of Padre LaRue, a rebellious Catholic priest from the 18th century. He led a group of followers away from famine-stricken Chihuahua, Mexico, to better horizons up north, supposedly after a dying Spanish soldier told him of gold lying just north of modern-day El Paso. The soldier said that there would be 3 peaks, one of them with a spring at its base. This was the one with the gold. After a perilous journey, Padre LaRue and his followers found the San Andreas Mountains, where at one of the peaks was the spring. After establishing a colony at Spirit Springs, the area was mined and prospected in hopes of finding what that dying soldier had spoken about. Then, southwest of the spring, a discovery. Deep inside the mountain, they found so much gold ore that it was mined for 2 whole years, smelting it into ingots and storing it within the mountain's caverns. So much so that even some of the cave walls were stacked with it. After word of he and his followers' endeavors with the gold reached Mexico City, soldiers were sent to the colony to investigate further. Not only that, but Padre LaRue was in trouble for both leaving his original post and failing to pay a gold tax to the Spanish crown, also known as the Royal Fifth. When the soldiers arrived, LaRue had the entrance to the mountains sealed shut to protect the gold. The priest and his people were apprehended and tortured for the location of the gold, but Padre LaRue died in their custody, never revealing the secret. Although it's unclear where this particular mountain was, many believe it could very well be Victorio Peak. There's the potential of the fortune belonging to Apache Chief Victorio, of which the peak is named after. He'd stolen from stagecoaches and organized raids in the 1870s, and could have possibly hidden what he'd looted there. Others suggest that perhaps the gold was originally supplied by the Germans to Pancho Villa during World War I in order to fund a conflict at the southern border to keep the United States distracted from the global conflict, and that perhaps this was the hiding place. Regardless if this proves anything, it's that the origins of this treasure are completely shrouded in mystery, but it is still just as relevant as it was in the 1930s. In the 1990s, Terry Delonis, the grandson of Ova Babe Noss, opened the Ova Noss Family Partnership, which carried out an additional search of Victorio Peak with the Army's permission, but sadly recovered nothing. The legal battles that the Noss family had fought over the years also fizzled out with time, and the mysterious fortune continues to lie in a dormant state. White Sands Missile Base still stands as the owner of that property, which means it has been completely untouched by curious treasure hunters for decades. What began with a jaw-dropping discovery deep in the desert ended with a book full of different layers, both dangerous just as they were elusive. Who was really responsible for the hidden treasure at Victorio Peak? Did the military actually extract the gold for themselves? And if so, did they manage to get all of it? And what about the remaining 110 gold bars buried sporadically throughout New Mexico? For now, we are left wondering if after all these years, under the bedrock, if a shining bounty of gold awaits beneath Victorio Peak.